Two abandoned black sisters sat in the rain at the hospital entrance. When the old doctor saw them, his hands started shaking as memories of his own loss came flooding back. Thunder cracked across the Memphis sky as Dr. Thomas Wheeler pulled into his usual parking spot at St. Francis Hospital. The clock on his dashboard showed 7:43 p.m. Rain pounded against his windshield, so heavy he could barely see the hospital's entrance 20 yards away. "Damn weather," he muttered, grabbing his worn leather bag from the passenger seat. His joints creaked as he stepped out into the downpour, his khakis immediately soaked. At 68, every rainy day made his knees remind him of his age. The automatic doors swooshed open. Agnes, the night shift receptionist, looked up from her crossword puzzle. "Dr. Wheeler, didn't expect to see you tonight." He shook water from his gray hair. "Left some paperwork in my old office. Figured I'd catch up on my volunteer hours while I'm here." "In this weather?" Agnes raised an eyebrow. "Most of our volunteers called off. Been coming here 30 years, Agnes. Little rain won't stop me." She shrugged and returned to her puzzle. Wheeler headed toward the elevator, his wet shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. The familiar antiseptic smell filled his nostrils. Some things never changed. The elevator doors opened to the 4th floor. His old office, now used for storage, still had his name on the door. Inside, family photos covered one wall. His eyes found the picture of Emily, his daughter, in her graduation gown. 10 years since the accident. The pain had dulled, but never quite left. A loud crash of thunder made him jump. Through his window, lightning illuminated the parking lot. That's when he saw them, two small figures huddled by the hospital entrance. Wheeler pressed his face against the glass. Two little girls sat on the ground, soaked to the bone. The older one held the younger protectively. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, already heading for the door. He took the stairs 2 at a time, ignoring his protesting knees. Agnes was on the phone when he rushed past. The automatic doors opened. Rain stung his face as he approached the girls. The older one, maybe 6 years old, wore a purple dress now plastered to her skin. The younger girl, around 4, clung to her sister. "Hey there," Wheeler said softly, crouching down despite his joints' complaints. "You two shouldn't be out here in this storm." The older girl's eyes met his, wary but desperate. "Waiting for Mama. Where is your Mama?" The doctors took her. Her voice trembled. After the crash, Wheeler's chest tightened. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sarah. This is Grace." She hugged her sister tighter. "Are you a doctor?" "I am, Dr. Wheeler. But you can call me Thomas." He shrugged off his coat, draping it over them. "How about we go inside where it's warm? We can find out about your Mama." Sarah hesitated. Grace sneezed. "I promise we'll stay together, okay? All of us." After a long moment, Sarah nodded. Wheeler helped them up, noting how Grace clung to her sister's hand. Inside, Agnes's eyes widened. "Dr. Wheeler, call pediatrics. And get me some blankets." His tone left no room for argument. "Now, please." She reached for the phone as Wheeler led the girls to the waiting area. Water dripped from their clothes onto the chairs. "You're shivering," he said, rubbing their arms through his coat. "How long were you out there?" "Don't know," Sarah whispered. "The police brought us. Said Mama was here." Grace sneezed again, harder this time. A nurse hurried over with blankets. Wheeler recognized her, Jenny, from his old department. Her eyes narrowed at the girls. "Dr. Wheeler, you can't just bring them in. There's protocols. They are patients now." He cut her off, wrapping the blankets around the sisters. "Grace here is showing signs of exposure, and they are both trauma cases. Their mother was in an accident. But get them both checked out. Full workup. I'll handle the paperwork." He turned to Sarah. "This is Nurse Jenny. She's going to help find out where your Mima is, okay?" Sarah's grip on Grace tightened. "You're staying?" Wheeler looked into those frightened eyes and saw something familiar. The same fear he'd seen in Emily's eyes during her hospital stays. "Yes," he said firmly. "I'm staying." Jenny sighed but gestured for them to follow. Wheeler watched them go, his wet clothes forgotten. Thunder rumbled outside, but the girls didn't flinch this time. Agnes cleared her throat. "Dr. Wheeler, found the mother. Jane Foster, car accident victim. She's in ICU. It's not good." Wheeler nodded, his mind already racing. These girls needed someone in their corner. He'd seen too many cases where children got lost in the system, especially minorities. The way Ginny had looked at them. Agnes, get me the number for social services. And find out who's attending in ICU. You're really getting involved in this. He thought of Emily. Of all the times he'd wished someone had fought harder for her. Yes, he said. I am. The storm raged on outside, but Wheeler barely noticed. He had promises to keep now. Promises made to two little girls who reminded him too much of his own lost chance at being a father. His phone buzzed. A text from his sister. Where are you? Family dinner tonight. Remember? Wheeler typed back. Emergency at hospital. Can't make it. The response came quickly. Again? You're retired, Thomas. Let it go. He put the phone away, watching Sarah and Grace through the exam room window. Let it go. No, not this time. Dr. Wheeler. Agnes called. Social services is on line 1. He straightened his shoulders and picked up the phone. The real storm, he knew, was just beginning. Sarah's voice drifted from the exam room. Is Dr. Thomas really staying? Yes, Ginny answered, her tone softer now. He always keeps his promises. Wheeler gripped the phone tighter. Damn right he did. The social worker's voice crackled through the line. This is Linda Martinez. I understand you have the foster sisters. Yes, Wheeler said. And they are not going anywhere tonight. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the empty parking spot where he'd found them. Sometimes the biggest changes came on the stormiest nights. Wheeler had lost his chance to save Emily. But maybe, just maybe, he could help these girls. He took a deep breath and began explaining the situation to Linda. Outside his window, the rain finally began to ease. Sarah watched him through the exam room window, her eyes full of trust he hadn't earned yet. But he would. One way or another, he would. Linda Martinez arrived at St. Francis Hospital just before midnight, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached the pediatric ward. Dr. Wheeler sat in a chair outside room 204, his clothes still damp from the rain. Dr. Wheeler. She extended her hand. We spoke on the phone. He stood, shaking her hand firmly. Thank you for coming so late. Linda glanced through the room's window. Sarah and Grace slept on the hospital bed, curled around each other like kittens. How are they? Grace has a mild fever. Sarah's physically fine, but Wheeler's jaw tightened. She hasn't let go of her sister's hand since they got here. Linda opened her tablet. I have their mother's information. Jane Foster, single parent, works as a nurse at Methodist downtown. Car hydroplaned on the interstate. She's in critical condition. I know. I checked on her an hour ago. Wheeler rubbed his tired eyes. No change. Dr. Wheeler, I need to be clear about something. These girls need emergency placement tonight. They are patients. They can stay. Hospital policy allows overnight stays only when medically necessary. Linda's voice remained professional but firm. Grace's fever isn't severe enough to warrant admission. I have to take them. Wheeler straightened. Take them where? I have a foster family in Germantown willing to take Grace. Another in Cordova can. You're separating them? Wheeler's voice rose sharply. He glanced at the sleeping girls and lowered it again. They've just lost access to their mother. You can't separate them now. Dr. Wheeler, I understand your concern. But, no, you don't. He stepped closer. I've seen what trauma does to children. Separating them will cause psychological damage. Linda sighed. Finding a family willing to take both girls on emergency notice isn't easy. Especially, she trailed off. Especially what? Wheeler's tone turned icy. Especially for two black girls. Linda flushed. That's not what Dr. Wheeler. Sarah's small voice came from the doorway. She stood there in her hospital gown, eyes wide. Are they taking Grace away? Wheeler moved to her quickly. No, sweetheart. Go back to sleep. But Sarah backed away, shaking. You promised we'd stay together. Her voice rose in panic, waking Grace. Sarah. Grace sat up, confused. They want to take you away. Sarah ran to her sister, throwing her arms around her. Grace began to cry. Linda stepped forward. Girls, calm down. No. Sarah screamed. You can't take her. You can't. Wheeler watched Grace bury her face in Sarah's nightgown, their sobs echoing through the quiet ward. His mind flashed to Emily, screaming as nurses held her down for another treatment. Enough, he said quietly. Then louder. Enough. Everyone froze. Wheeler turned to Linda. Give me 24 hours. Hospital policy. To hell with policy. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling Marcus Chen. Linda's eyes widened. The hospital administrator? At this hour? I worked with him for 20 years. He owes me some favors. Wheeler dialed. 24 hours to find a solution that keeps them together. Dr. Wheeler, you can fight me on this and traumatize these girls further, or you can give me one day to find a better way. He met her eyes. Your choice. The phone rang. Sarah and Grace watched, holding each other tightly. Marcus? Sorry to wake you. It's Thomas Wheeler. I need a favor. 30 minutes later, Linda left with a signed temporary extension allowing the girls to stay in the pediatric ward. Wheeler slumped in his chair, exhausted. Dr. Thomas? Sarah stood in the doorway again. You should be sleeping. Is Grace really staying? He patted the chair next to him. Sarah came over, climbing up. Yes, she's staying. I promised. Remember? Sarah leaned against his arm. Mama always says promises matter. Your mama sounds very wise. Wheeler swallowed hard. Tell me about her. She works lots. 2 jobs. But she always reads to us at bedtime. Sarah's voice quivered. Even when she's tired. What does she read? Grace likes dragon stories. I like the ones about space. Wheeler smiled. I have some space books at home. Maybe I could bring them tomorrow. Sarah nodded against his arm. Her breathing slowly steadied. Dr. Thomas? Thank you for not letting them take Grace. Wheeler felt tears prick his eyes. Always, sweetheart. Morning brought new challenges. Jenny arrived for her shift, frowning when she saw Wheeler still there. You stayed all night? He grunted, accepting the coffee she offered. Thomas, she said softly. What are you doing? My job. You're retired. These girls aren't your responsibility. Wheeler watched Grace teaching Sarah a clapping game through the window. Someone has to fight for them. The system wants to tear them apart. He turned to her. You've worked pediatrics 15 years, Jenny. You know what happens to kids like them in the system. She didn't answer. Dr. Wheeler. Agnes hurried down the hall. ICU called. Jane Foster's pressure is dropping. His chest tightened. Stay with the girls, he told Jenny, already moving. In ICU, machines beeped urgently around Jane Foster's bed. Dr. Patel, the attending physician, looked up as Wheeler entered. You're the one watching her daughters. Wheeler nodded, scanning Jane's vitals. How bad? Bleeding in her brain. We're prepping for surgery. Patel hesitated. If she crashes. I know. Wheeler studied Jane's face, young, determined even in unconsciousness. She's all they have. Not anymore, Patel said quietly. They have you too, from what I hear. Wheeler left ICU with his mind racing. He had 23 hours left to find a solution. His phone buzzed. His sister again. Thomas, what's going on? Marcus Chen called asking about your spare room. He stopped walking. The spare room. Emily's old room, untouched for 10 years. I'll call you back, he said. Down the hall, he heard Grace's laugh mixing with Sarah's. Something stirred in his chest. Purpose. Maybe. Or hope. His knees ached from standing all night. His back screamed for a proper bed. But for the first time in years, Thomas Wheeler felt truly awake. He pulled out his phone again and dialed Linda's number. It's Wheeler. I need the paperwork for emergency foster care certification. A pause. Dr. Wheeler, are you sure? He watched the sisters through the window, playing despite everything. Just like Emily had, finding joy even in hospital rooms, yes, he said. I'm sure. The storm had passed, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold. Wheeler dozed in the hospital room's recliner, his neck at an awkward angle. Sarah's voice pulled him from his shallow sleep. Grace is burning up again. He blinked awake. Grace whimpered in the hospital bed, her forehead shining with sweat. Wheeler pressed his hand to her skin. Jenny, he called out. The night nurse hurried in. Her fever's back. Jenny checked Grace's temperature. 102.3. I'll get some Tylenol. Sarah clutched her sister's hand. Is she gonna be okay? Of course she is, sweetheart. Wheeler smoothed Grace's damp hair. Just a fever from being in the rain too long. Grace's eyes fluttered open. Want mama? Wheeler's heart clenched. Jane Foster's surgery had ended 3 hours ago. She remained in critical condition, unresponsive. Jenny returned with medicine. Dr. Wheeler, Linda Martinez is here. Again. He nodded. Sarah, stay with your sister. I'll be right back. Linda waited in the hallway, looking tired. You haven't slept, have you? I'm fine. This isn't sustainable. She handed him a folder. I've reviewed your emergency foster care application. Wheeler straightened. And? Your age is a concern. So is your health history. Linda sighed. The committee's unlikely to approve it. My age? Wheeler's voice rose. I was chief of pediatrics for 15 years. I raised a daughter. I had a heart attack 2 years ago. Linda cut in. It's in your records. Minor. Fully recovered. Dr. Wheeler. Linda's voice softened. I know you care about these girls. But you're 68, living alone, with a history of cardiac issues. The committee won't place 2 young children with you. Wheeler gripped the folder tighter. So you'll separate them instead. We don't have a choice. Grace's fever buys us another day, maybe 2. After that, Dr. Thomas. Sarah's panicked voice came from the room. She's throwing up. They rushed back in. Grace hunched over, vomiting into a basin Jenny held. Sarah rubbed her back, crying. Temperature's up to 103, Jenny reported. Wheeler moved quickly, checking Grace's pupils, her pulse. Could be pneumonia setting in. Get a chest x-ray ordered. Linda watched from the doorway as Wheeler worked, his movements sure despite his age. Sarah clung to his sleeve. Is she really sick now? Sarah whispered. Wheeler hugged her with one arm. We'll take care of her. I promise. Hours blurred together. Grace's x-ray showed the beginnings of pneumonia. Wheeler barely left the room, monitoring her temperature, consulting with the pediatrician on call. Around dawn, his sister Catherine arrived uninvited. Thomas, this is insane. She cornered him in the hallway. You can't keep doing this. Not now, Catherine. Yes, now. Marcus called me again. You're trying to become a foster parent. She grabbed his arm. Have you lost your mind? Wheeler jerked away. You don't understand. I understand you're killing yourself over 2 strangers' children. Catherine's voice cracked. Just like with Emily. Working yourself to exhaustion won't bring her back. This isn't about Emily. Everything's been about Emily for 10 years. She lowered her voice. You're not thinking clearly. These girls deserve, what? Wheeler snapped. To be separated? Traumatized? To feel abandoned when they're already losing their mother. They deserve someone younger. Someone with the energy to raise children. They deserve someone who cares. Wheeler's hands shook. Someone who'll fight for them. And that has to be you? Yes, he said simply. It does. Catherine stared at him. You'll break your own heart again. Better my heart than theirs. Inside the room, Grace's fever finally broke. Sarah slept curled against her sister, tear tracks dried on her cheeks. Wheeler watched them through the window. You can't save everyone, Thomas, Catherine said softly. I'm not trying to save everyone. He turned to her. Just them. She left without another word. Wheeler went back into the room, settling into his chair. His joints ached. His chest felt tight. But he couldn't leave. Linda returned that afternoon with another social worker, an older woman named Ruth Harris. Dr. Wheeler, Ruth said, we need to discuss options. He knew that tone. What options? The Hendersons in Germantown are willing to take Grace permanently. The Taylors in Cordova. No. The word came out like a growl. Their mother's condition is deteriorating, Ruth said. We need permanent placement plans. She could still wake up. And if she doesn't? Linda asked. Dr. Wheeler, be realistic. You can't keep them here forever. Sarah stirred in her sleep. Wheeler lowered his voice. Give me more time. We've given you 4 days, Ruth said. That's 3 days longer than protocol allows. Then break protocol. Like you did. Ruth's eyes narrowed. Calling in favors, manipulating the system. I'm trying to protect them. No, you're trying to save yourself. Ruth's words hit like slaps. These girls need stability, not a retired doctor's guilt project. Wheeler stood, fury rising. Get out. Dr. Wheeler, get out. They left. Wheeler's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He pressed them against his legs. Dr. Thomas. Sarah's small voice came from the bed. Are they going to take us? He turned. She sat up, eyes huge with fear. Grace slept on, her fever finally gone. Wheeler moved to the bed. Gathering Sarah into his arms, she clung to him. Nobody's taking you anywhere, he whispered. I swear it. But they said, They don't decide. Wheeler held her tighter. I'm not giving up on you girls. Not ever. Sarah sniffled against his shirt. Promise. Promise. Later, watching them sleep, Wheeler made his decision. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus Chen's number. Marcus? I need one more favor. A big one. He looked at the sisters, peaceful despite everything. Catherine was right. This would probably break his heart. But some things were worth breaking for. I want to apply for emergency temporary custody, he said. Not foster care. Full custody. A pause. Thomas, are you sure? Wheeler thought of Emily. Of chances lost and found. Of promises made in the rain. Yes, he said. I'm sure. Wheeler sat in his car in the hospital parking lot, staring at the custody paperwork on his passenger seat. The digital clock showed 4:37 a.m. He hadn't been home in 5 days. His phone buzzed. Catherine again. He ignored it. Inside the hospital, Sarah and Grace slept in room 204. Grace's pneumonia had improved enough for discharge, which meant time had run out. In 6 hours, Ruth Harris would return with placement papers. Wheeler's hands gripped the steering wheel. The motion sensor light above his car clicked off, leaving him in darkness. What am I doing? He whispered to the empty car. The custody papers seemed to mock him. Emergency temporary custody application. His signature still blank at the bottom. A tap on his window made him jump. Jenny stood there, holding 2 coffee cups. He rolled down the window. Shouldn't you be on rounds? Shouldn't you be sleeping? She handed him a coffee. The girls are asking for you. I just needed a minute. Jenny leaned against his car. To what? Talk yourself out of it. To think clearly. He sipped the coffee. Catherine's right. I'm too old for this. Says who? Says reality. Wheeler rubbed his eyes. I had a heart attack 2 years ago. I live alone. I haven't taken care of a child since. He stopped. Since Emily, Jenny finished softly. Wheeler looked at the hospital's illuminated entrance where he'd found the girls less than a week ago. I couldn't save her, he said. What makes me think I can help them? Because you already are. Jenny straightened. Those girls trust you. Need you? They need someone younger. Someone with. They need someone who gives a damn. Jenny's voice sharpened. Someone who sees them as people, not case numbers. Wheeler picked up the custody papers. His daughter's photo smiled at him from his dashboard. I keep seeing her in them, he admitted. In Sarah's determination. Grace's laugh. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Inside the hospital, a light flicked on in room 204. Sarah's silhouette appeared at the window. She's looking for you, Jenny said. Wheeler's chest tightened. 5 days ago, these girls were strangers. Now, I have to go. He gathered the papers. Thanks for the coffee. Sarah met him at the door, her small face worried. You left. Just for a little while. He lifted her onto his hip, surprised at how natural it felt. Couldn't sleep? She shook her head. Bad dream. Want to talk about it? Sarah buried her face in his shoulder. They took Grace away. I couldn't find her. Wheeler carried her to the recliner, settling her on his lap. Nobody's taking Grace anywhere. Promise. That word again. Such a simple word, carrying so much weight. Sarah. He turned her to face him. What if you both came to stay with me? Just until your mama gets better. Her eyes widened. At your house? Millimeter him. I have a spare room. We could put up space posters, like the ones in your mama's house. Grace too. Of course Grace too. Wheeler smoothed her hair. Would you like that? Sarah studied him with an intensity that belied her 6 years. Forever. Until your mama's better. His throat tightened. But I'll always be here for you both. No matter what. She wrapped her arms around his neck. Can we bring Mr. Spots? Who's Mr. Spots? My giraffe. He's at home. We'll get him. Wheeler held her close. We'll get everything you need. Grace stirred in her bed. Sarah? Hey, baby. Sarah climbed down and went to her sister. Dr. Thomas says we can stay with him. Grace's fever-bright eyes found Wheeler. Together. Together, he confirmed. Both of you. Grace reached for his hand. Her small fingers wrapped around his, trusting completely. Wheeler's heart thundered in his chest. Not from fear this time. From certainty. He pulled out the custody papers and his pen. His signature flowed across the bottom line, steady and sure. Ruth Harris arrived at exactly 8 a.m., another stack of placement papers under her arm. Dr. Wheeler, we need to. He handed her his signed custody application. Already done. She blinked. You're serious about this? Deadly. Wheeler stood between her and the girl's room. I've got character references from Marcus Chen, 3 former colleagues, and my family doctor. The house inspection is scheduled for noon. My lawyer will be here in an hour. Dr. Wheeler, I'm also filing an injunction to prevent separation pending the custody hearing. His voice hardened. They're not going anywhere. Ruth studied him for a long moment. You understand what you're taking on? At your age, I understand exactly what I'm doing. Down the hall, Linda Martinez stepped off the elevator. She saw the signed papers in Ruth's hands. You're really doing this? She asked Wheeler. Yes. Linda exchanged looks with Ruth. It won't be easy. The committee will see a decorated physician with 40 years' experience caring for children. Wheeler's chin lifted. A homeowner with financial stability and a support network of medical professionals. And if they say no, they won't. He met their eyes. Because you're going to help me. Ruth raised an eyebrow. Am I? Yes. Because you've seen me with them. You know I can give them what they need most. Stability, love, and a chance to stay together. The sound of laughter drifted from room 204. Sarah was teaching Grace a clapping game again. Please, Wheeler said softly. Help me help them. Ruth sighed. The home inspection has to be today. You'll need childproofing, separate beds, age-appropriate. Done. Wheeler handed her another paper. My sister's handling it now. She's an interior designer. Linda almost smiled. You thought of everything. No. Wheeler looked at the girls through the window. They thought of everything. I'm just catching up. His phone buzzed. Catherine. The beds are being delivered. Paint's drying in the spare room. Space posters ordered. Wheeler's throat tightened. Thank you, Cather. A pause. You're really sure about this? He watched Sarah help Grace drink her juice, supporting the cup carefully. More sure than I've been about anything in 10 years. Catherine sighed. Then we'll make it work. Together. Wheeler hung up as his lawyer stepped off the elevator. Time to make it official. Sarah pressed her face against the window, waving at him. He waved back, his heart full. Some decisions changed everything. This one already had. Wheeler's hands shook as he turned the key in his front door. Behind him, Sarah and Grace stood silent, clutching their few belongings in hospital bags. Here we are, he said, pushing the door open. Home. Sarah stepped in first, her eyes wide. Grace clung to her sister's hand. The house smelled of fresh paint and new furniture. Catherine had worked miracles in 24 hours. The spare room, Emily's old room, now held 2 twin beds with bright blue comforters. Space posters covered one wall, just as promised. This is all for us. Sarah whispered. All for you. Wheeler set down their bags. Want to see your room? Grace tugged Sarah's hand. Scared. Wheeler knelt beside them, his knees protesting. It's okay to be scared. New places are scary sometimes. Even for doctors? Sarah asked. Even for doctors. He held out his hands. Shall we explore together? After a moment, they each took one of his hands. He led them upstairs, trying to see his home through their eyes. The wooden stairs that creaked, the family photos on the walls, the window seat where Emily used to read. Their room lay at the end of the hall. Catherine had removed all traces of its previous occupant, but Wheeler still felt Emily's presence as he opened the door. Look, Grace. Sarah's face lit up. Stars on the ceiling. Glow-in-the-dark stars dotted the freshly painted blue ceiling. Grace's grip on Wheeler's hand loosened slightly. Pretty, she whispered. The beds are magic too, Wheeler said. Watch. He flicked a switch. Tiny lights embedded in the bed frames twinkled like constellations. Grace actually smiled. Like Christmas. Better than Christmas, Sarah declared. She ran to one bed, bouncing experimentally. Can we sleep here tonight? Wheeler's chest tightened. Of course. This is your room now. A car door slammed outside. Grace startled, pressing against his leg. That's just Ms. Linda, he soothed. Remember? She has to check the house. Sarah's face fell. Do we have to leave if she doesn't like it? No. Wheeler's voice turned firm. You're staying right here. Linda's knock echoed through the house. Wheeler led the girls downstairs, Grace still clinging to him. Dr. Wheeler. Linda stood on his porch with her tablet. Girls. Sarah moved closer to Wheeler. Even after a week, she remained wary of social workers. Come in, Wheeler said. We'll start with the kitchen. The inspection took 2 hours. Linda checked every room, taking photos and notes. Wheeler answered her questions while helping the girls unpack their few possessions. The house is well prepared, Linda admitted finally. Your sister did excellent work. Wheeler nodded. She's thorough. However, Linda lowered her voice. There are concerns about your physical capabilities, such as the stairs. Your knee problems are documented, and in an emergency, I can carry them both if needed. Wheeler straightened to his full height. Would you like a demonstration? Linda sighed. That won't be necessary, but the committee will want a full medical evaluation. Fine. Schedule it. Dr. Wheeler. A crash from the kitchen interrupted them. They rushed in to find a broken glass on the floor and Grace in tears. I'm sorry, she wailed. Sorry. Wheeler moved quickly, lifting her away from the glass. Sure, it's okay. Are you hurt? Grace shook her head, still crying. Sarah grabbed the broom. I'll clean it. Dr. Thomas. No, sweetheart. There might be splinters. Wheeler settled Grace on the counter. Let me get this. He cleaned up efficiently, years of hospital protocol taking over. When he finished, he found Linda watching him with an odd expression. What? Nothing. She made a note on her tablet. Just observing. Grace's tears had subsided to hiccups. Wheeler wiped her face with a paper towel. Better. She nodded. Not mad. Of course not. Glasses break sometimes. Mama gets mad, Grace whispered. Wheeler's heart clenched. Well, I don't. Okay. Grace studied his face, then held up her arms. Wheeler lifted her, his back protesting slightly. Linda cleared her throat. I should go. I'll file my report today. Wheeler walked her to the door. Grace still in his arms. Sarah trailed behind them. The committee meets Monday, Linda said. You'll need references, financial records. They'll be on your desk tomorrow. Wheeler shifted Grace to his hip. Anything else? Linda looked at the girls, then back at him. You're really committed to this? Completely. She nodded slowly. I'll do what I can. After she left, Wheeler carried Grace back upstairs. His arms trembled slightly from fatigue. Dr. Thomas. Sarah tugged his sleeve. Can we call the hospital? Check on Mama. Of course. He set Grace down on her bed. Let me get my phone. The call was brief. No change in Jane's condition. But she's not worse, Wheeler assured them. That's good. Sarah curled up on her bed. I miss her. I know, sweetheart. Wheeler sat between their beds. Want to tell me about her? For the next hour, the girls shared stories. How their mama sang while cooking. How she worked night shifts but never missed a school event. How she saved for months to buy Sarah a telescope. She sounds amazing, Wheeler said softly. She is. Sarah's voice caught. Will she wake up? Wheeler wished he could lie. I don't know, but we'll visit her every day until she does. Grace's stomach growled loudly. Sarah giggled. Hungry? Wheeler stood. How about pizza? With pepperoni? Grace perked up. Whatever you want. Later, after pizza and baths, an adventure involving more water on the floor than in the tub. Wheeler tucked them into their new beds. Dr. Thomas. Sarah's voice was sleepy. Thank you. For what? For keeping us together. For the stars. Wheeler's vision blurred. You're welcome, sweetheart. He turned on their constellation lights and moved to the door. Wait. Grace sat up. Story. Please. Sarah added. Wheeler settled into the chair between their beds. What kind of story? Space story, Grace said firmly. Space story it is. Wheeler cleared his throat. Once upon a time, there were two bright stars who fell to Earth. He told stories until they fell asleep, their faces peaceful in the twinkling lights. His body ached from the long day, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. In the hallway, he paused at a photo of Emily. I'm trying, baby, he whispered. I'm trying. Wheeler's regular doctor, Steve Phillips, frowned at the blood pressure reading. 140/90. Higher than I'd like. I've been stressed. Wheeler rolled down his sleeve. The custody hearing's tomorrow. Steve made notes in his chart. And how's the knee? Fine. Thomas. Steve gave him a look. Truth. Wheeler sighed. It aches. Stairs are harder. But I'm managing. And your heart? No issues since the attack. Steve leaned back in his chair. You're pushing yourself too hard. These readings. I need you to clear me. Wheeler leaned forward. Those girls need me. And what happens to them if you collapse? Have another heart attack? Wheeler's jaw tightened. That won't happen. You don't know that. Steve's voice softened. Look, I've known you 30 years. You're one of the best doctors I've ever met. But you're also 68 with a history of cardiac issues. So you won't support my custody application. I didn't say that. Steve started writing. I'm clearing you, with conditions. Regular checkups, stress management. And you need help, someone to assist with the physical demands. Wheeler started to protest. Non-negotiable, Steve cut him off. Take it or I can't sign off. Wheeler's phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. Girls ready for pickup from school. Want me to get them? Fine, Wheeler told Steve. I'll hire help. Steve handed him the medical clearance. How are they adjusting? Wheeler checked his watch. Sarah's doing well in school. Grace is still quiet, but she's opening up. They're amazing kids. And their mother. No change. Wheeler stood. I need to go. School pickup. Thomas. Steve stopped him at the door. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Just take care of yourself too. Wheeler drove to Memphis Elementary, his mind on the upcoming hearing. The custody application, medical clearance, character references, everything had to be perfect. Sarah waited by the school entrance, holding Grace's hand. Their faces lit up when they saw him. Dr. Thomas. Grace ran to him. I drawed a picture. Drew. Sarah corrected automatically. Wheeler lifted Grace, grunting slightly. Let's see this masterpiece. Grace proudly showed him a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands. That's you. And Sarah. And me. Wheeler's throat tightened. It's beautiful, sweetheart. We'll put it on the fridge. Can we visit Mama? Sarah asked as they walked to the car. Of course. We'll go right now. The ICU was quiet when they arrived. Jane Foster lay unchanged, machines beeping steadily around her. Sarah took her usual spot by the bed. Hi, Mama. I got an A on my science test. Grace climbed into Wheeler's lap in the corner chair. This was their routine now, Sarah talking to Jane while Grace sought comfort in Wheeler's presence. And Dr. Thomas helped me build a solar system model, Sarah continued. Grace colored Neptune green even though it's blue. But that's okay. Wheeler's phone vibrated. Linda Martinez. I'll be right back, he whispered to Grace. She nodded, thumb creeping toward her mouth. In the hallway, Linda got straight to the point. The Hendersons withdrew their foster application. Wheeler's breath caught. The family that wanted to take Grace. Why? They're moving to Nashville. Linda paused. It helps your case. One less competing placement option. And the Taylors? Still interested in Sarah? Linda's voice hardened. Dr. Wheeler, you should know. They're planning to testify at tomorrow's hearing. They'll argue they can provide a more stable environment. Wheeler's hand clenched around his phone. Meaning? They're younger. Dual income. No health issues. And they want to separate the girls. They believe. A commotion from Jane's room cut her off. Alarms blared. Sarah screamed. Wheeler ran back in. Jane's body was rigid, seizing. Grace cried in the corner while Sarah stood frozen by the bed. Code blue. Wheeler yelled, lifting Sarah away. Medical staff rushed in. What's happening? Sarah struggled in his arms. Mama. Wheeler carried her to where Grace huddled. It's okay. The doctors will help her. He held them both as the team worked, his heart pounding. Please, he thought. Please don't let them lose her. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the alarms quieted. She's stable, Dr. Patel announced. But what? Wheeler demanded. Patel glanced at the girls. Can we talk outside? Wheeler looked down at Sarah and Grace, clinging to him. No. Whatever it is, say it here. They deserve to know. Patel nodded slowly. The seizure was caused by increased brain activity. She's showing signs of emerging from the coma. Sarah's grip tightened. Mama's waking up? Maybe. It could take time. But, yes, she's fighting. Grace began to cry again, but differently now. Wheeler held them closer, his own eyes burning. When? He asked. Hours. Days. There's no way to know. Patel checked Jane's vitals. But this is a positive sign. Later, after the girls finally fell asleep in chairs by Jane's bed, Wheeler stepped out to call Linda. Postpone the hearing, he said. Their mother's showing improvement. Dr. Wheeler, just until we know more. Please. A long pause. I'll try. But the judge may not agree. Wheeler watched the girls through the window. Then I'll fight harder. He hung up as Dr. Patel approached. Her latest scans, Patel said, showing him the tablet. See this activity? Wheeler studied the images. She's definitely emerging. Thanks to you. Wheeler looked up. What? The girls' daily visits. Their voices. You bringing them here consistently. Patel smiled. It matters. You've given Jane something to fight for. Wheeler's vision blurred. He blinked hard. I should check their blankets, he said roughly. Grace gets cold. Inside the room, he tucked blankets around the sleeping girls. Sarah stirred. Dr. Thomas. Sure. Sleep. Is Mama really waking up? Wheeler smoothed her hair. She's trying very hard. Sarah's eyes filled. I'm scared. Why, sweetheart? What if she's mad we stayed with you? Wheeler's heart broke a little. Oh, Sarah, your Mama loves you more than anything. She'll be happy you were safe and loved. You promise? He gathered her close. I promise. Sarah drifted off again. Wheeler settled into his usual chair, ignoring his protesting back. On the bed, Jane's fingers twitched. Wheeler reached out, taking her hand. They need you, he whispered. But until you're ready, I've got them. I swear. The monitors beeped steadily. Outside, Memphis continued its evening rhythm. And in a hospital room, a makeshift family held on to hope. The first time Jane Foster opened her eyes, Wheeler almost missed it. He dozed off in the ICU chair, Sarah and Grace asleep against him, when a nurse's excited whisper woke him. Dr. Wheeler, look. He blinked awake. Jane's eyes were open, unfocused but aware. Girls, he said softly. Wake up. Sarah stirred first. She saw her mother's open eyes and froze. Mama. Jane's lips moved silently. Grace woke at her sister's voice. Mama. She tried to run to the bed. Wheeler caught her. Gentle, sweetheart. Remember what we talked about? Mama needs quiet and calm. The nurse checked Jane's vitals while Wheeler helped the girls approach slowly. Jane's eyes tracked their movement. Hi, Mama. Sarah's voice trembled. Can you hear me? Jane's fingers twitched. Sarah reached for her hand. Careful of the fall. Wheeler reminded her. Jane's eyes found him, confused. Her mouth worked again. Don't try to talk yet, he said. You've been asleep a long time. Grace pressed against the bed rail. Mama, I missed you. A tear slid down Jane's cheek. The nurse wiped it away. I'll get Dr. Patel, she said. Wheeler nodded, keeping his hands on the girl's shoulders. Your Mama needs to rest. We can't tire her out. But, Sarah started. Sarah, his tone gentle but firm. Remember what Dr. Patel said? Small steps. Jane's eyes drifted closed. Sarah's shoulders slumped. She's just tired, Wheeler assured them. This is good news. Dr. Patel arrived, reviewing Jane's charts. Excellent progress. But she'll drift in and out for a while. How long until she's really awake? Sarah asked. Hard to say. Hours. Maybe days. Patel smiled at the girls. But she knows you're here. That helps. Grace tugged Wheeler's sleeve. Can we stay? Of course. He settled them back in their chairs. But homework first. They worked on math and spelling while Jane slept. Wheeler watched her vital signs, noting each small improvement. His phone buzzed. Linda, the judge won't postpone, she said without preamble. Hearing's still on for tomorrow. Wheeler's jaw tightened. Jane's awake, conscious but not coherent. She can't make legal decisions yet. So we wait. Dr. Wheeler, I'm not leaving these girls. A pause. The Taylors hired a lawyer. They're pushing hard for Sarah. Wheeler watched Sarah help Grace with her numbers. They can push all they want. Thomas. Linda rarely used his first name. Even with Jane awake, recovery could take months. The girls need stability. They have stability. With me. A judge may disagree. Wheeler ended the call. His hands shook slightly as he pocketed the phone. Dr. Thomas. Sarah looked up. Are you okay? Fine, sweetheart. How's that math coming? Hours passed. Jane woke twice more, each time more alert. By evening, she could squeeze their hands weakly. Girls, Wheeler said around dinner time. We should go home, get some rest. No. Grace clung to the bed rail. Mama needs rest too, he explained. We'll come back first thing tomorrow. Sarah stuttered him. Promise. Promise. They gathered their things. As Wheeler helped Grace with her jacket, Jane's eyes opened again. Wait, Sarah said. She's trying to say something. They moved closer. Jane's lips moved soundlessly at first. Then, thank you. Wheeler's heart stopped. Her voice was barely a whisper, but clear. Mama. Sarah trembled. My babies. Jane's fingers twitched toward them. Grace burst into tears. Sarah grabbed her mother's hand. Shoo, Grace. Wheeler lifted her. Happy tears. Right. Jane's eyes found his again. This time, recognition flickered. You. She managed. I'm Dr. Wheeler. Thomas Wheeler. He moved closer. Your girls have been staying with me. Fear crossed her face. Wheeler quickly added, they are safe. Together. I've been taking care of them. Jane tried to speak again but couldn't. Her eyes filled with tears. Rest, Wheeler said gently. We'll be back tomorrow. Right, girls? First thing, Sarah promised. I love you, Mama. Love you. Jane's eyes drifted closed. In the hallway, Grace wouldn't let go of Wheeler's neck. Sarah held his hand so tight it hurt. Is Mama really better? Grace whispered. She's getting better. Wheeler carried her to the elevator. It'll take time. But she knew us, Sarah said. She talked. She did. That's huge progress. In the car, both girls were unusually quiet. Wheeler glanced in the rearview mirror. What's wrong? Sarah bit her lip. When Mama's better, do we have to leave? Wheeler's chest tightened. That's up to your Mama. But you'll always have me, no matter what. Promise. I promise. He met her eyes in the mirror. Nothing changes that. At home, neither girl wanted to sleep in their room. Wheeler found them blankets, and they all camped in the living room. Story? Grace asked. Which one? The stars one, Sarah said. About the sisters. Wheeler smiled. Their favorite now. Once upon a time, there were two bright stars who fell to earth. They fell asleep during the story, curled together on the couch. Wheeler covered them carefully. His phone lit up. Catherine. How is she? Awake. Talking a little. And you? Wheeler watched the girls sleep. Scared. Of what? Losing them. His voice cracked. The hearing's tomorrow. If the judge rules against me, then we'll appeal. Catherine's voice turned fierce. You're not in this alone, Thomas. I know. He wiped his eyes. I can't fail them, Kathy. You won't. She paused. Want me to come over? Wheeler looked at the girls, peaceful despite everything. No. We're okay. He managed a smile. We're camping. Call if you need anything. Anytime. I will. He hesitated. Kathy, thank you for understanding. They are family now, she said simply. Get some rest. Wheeler settled into his recliner, watching the girls sleep. On the mantel, Emily's photo seemed to smile at them all. Watch over us, he whispered to her. Just for tonight. Grace stirred, whimpering. Wheeler reached out, taking her small hand. Sure. He soothed. I'm here. She settled, thumb creeping to her mouth. Sarah snuggled closer to her sister. Outside, Memphis slept. Tomorrow would bring the hearing, more challenges, more fears. But tonight, in a living room filled with love and trust, none of that mattered. Wheeler closed his eyes, still holding Grace's hand. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Jane Foster gripped the parallel bars, her arms shaking with effort. Wheeler stood nearby, ready to catch her if needed. You're doing great, the physical therapist encouraged. 2 more steps. Sarah and Grace watched from their chairs, homework forgotten. It had been 3 weeks since Jane first woke up. Come on, Mama, Sarah called. Jane's jaw tightened. She took another shaky step. Last one, Wheeler said softly. You've got this. The final step brought Jane to the end of the bars. Her legs gave out, but Wheeler caught her before she could fall. I've got you, he said, helping her into the wheelchair. That's a new record. Grace ran over with a water bottle. Hey, Mama. Thank you, baby. Jane's voice was stronger now, though still raspy. She looked at Wheeler. You don't have to stay for every session. I know. He smiled. Girls, homework. They returned to their chairs, but kept watching. Jane took slow sips of water. The judge's decision comes today, she said quietly. Wheeler nodded. The custody hearing had lasted 3 days. Now they waited. Thomas. Jane touched his arm. Whatever happens, don't. He stepped back. Let's focus on your recovery. The physical therapist returned with Jane's schedule. 3 sessions next week. Dr. Wheeler, will you be bringing her? Before he could answer, Jane said, he will. He always does. Later, driving home, Sarah asked, can we have pizza tonight? Again. Wheeler chuckled. We had pizza Tuesday. Please. Grace added. With pepperoni? Let me guess. No vegetables. Yuck. Grace made a face. Wheeler caught Sarah watching him in the mirror. What's wrong, sweetheart? When will the judge call? His hands tightened on the steering wheel. Soon. What if, Sarah? He met her eyes in the mirror. What did I promise? That we'll stay together, she whispered. Always. At home, the girls ran upstairs to change. Wheeler's phone rang. Catherine. Any news? Not yet. He sank onto the couch. Jane did better in therapy today. Thomas. Catherine paused. Have you thought about after? When she's recovered? One day at a time. Kathy. The girls are attached to you. And you to them. Wheeler watched Sarah help Grace with her shoes at the top of the stairs. I know, he said softly. The doorbell rang. Grace called down. Pizza. That was fast, Wheeler said. It's not pizza. Linda Martinez stood on his porch. The judge ruled. Wheeler's heart stopped. Come in. The girls thundered downstairs. Pizza. They froze when they saw Linda. Hello, girls. She smiled. Could I talk to Dr. Wheeler alone? Sarah grabbed Grace's hand. Wheeler touched their shoulders. It's okay, he said. Go wash up. They went upstairs slowly, looking back. Linda waited until they were gone. The judge reviewed everything. Jane's condition, your home situation, the competing applications. Linda, she pulled out a document. Temporary custody is awarded to you, with permanent arrangements to be determined once Jane Foster recovers fully. Wheeler's legs went weak. He sat heavily. The Taylor's petition was denied, Linda continued. The judge cited the importance of keeping the sisters together, and your demonstrated ability to provide stable care. They are staying. Wheeler's voice cracked. Really staying? Linda smiled. Really staying? Congratulations. Upstairs, something crashed. Grace started crying. I should. Wheeler stood. Go. Linda handed him the papers. I'll see myself out. He took the stairs 2 at a time, finding Grace amid scattered books. I'm sorry, she wailed. I didn't mean to. Wheeler lifted her. Books forgotten. It's okay, sweetheart. Everything's okay. Sarah hovered nearby. What did Ms. Linda say? He held out his arm. She ran to him. We won, he whispered. You're staying with me. Grace's tears stopped. Really? Really? Sarah started crying then, clinging to him. Wheeler held them both, his own eyes wet. His phone buzzed. The hospital. Jane's asking for you all, the nurse said. She's having a rough evening. We'll be right there. At the hospital, they found Jane struggling with her evening exercises. Mama! The girls ran to her. Wheeler saw the tear tracks on her face. Rough day. She nodded. Can't. Feel discouraged. They need me. They do. Wheeler pulled up a chair. But you're not alone. Jane's eyes filled again. The judge ruled in our favor. He showed her the papers. I'll keep them safe until you're stronger. You already do. She touched the papers. I was so afraid, when I woke up, that they'd been separated. Never. Wheeler's voice hardened. I promised them. Jane stuttered him. Why? Why fight so hard for someone else's children? Wheeler thought of Emily, of lonely years and empty rooms because they needed someone to fight for them. He met her eyes, and because they stopped being someone else's children the moment I found them in the rain. Sarah brought over her school folder. Look, Mama, I got an A on my story. As Sarah read her story aloud, Wheeler watched Jane's face. The love there, the gratitude, the lingering fear. Jane, he said softly, I'm not trying to replace you. I know. She wiped her eyes. But you gave them a home when I couldn't. A temporary home. No. She touched his hand. A second home. Always. Grace climbed into Wheeler's lap, thumb creeping to her mouth. Story? She asked. Hey. Wheeler glanced at Jane. She smiled. I'd like to hear this famous story. Wheeler settled Grace more comfortably. Once upon a time, there were two bright stars who fell to earth. As he told the story, Sarah curled up beside her mother. Jane stroked her hair, growing stronger every day. Wheeler's phone buzzed. Catherine again. Pizza's getting cold, she texted. Should I bring it to the hospital? He smiled. Yes. Bring paper plates. Grace perked up. Pizza. With pepperoni, Wheeler promised. If your mama feels up to joining us. Jane nodded. Wouldn't miss it. Catherine arrived with boxes of pizza and paper plates. They had an impromptu picnic in Jane's room, breaking about 6 hospital regulations. But watching the girls laugh, seeing Jane smile, Wheeler couldn't bring himself to care about rules. Some families were born. Others were built, piece by piece, prayer by prayer, promise by promise. Looking around the room, Wheeler knew which kind was stronger. 1 year later, rain pounded against St. Francis Hospital's windows. Wheeler stood in the same spot where he'd first seen 2 small figures huddled in the storm. Dr. Thomas. Grace's voice echoed across the lobby. We brought cookies. He turned. Grace ran to him, her braids bouncing. At 7 now, she'd lost her baby shyness. Careful with those. Sarah called, carrying another container. There for the nurses. Behind them, Jane Foster walked steadily, her cane barely touching the ground. Sorry we're late, she said. School conference ran long. Wheeler took the cookies from Grace. How'd it go? Grace got all A's. Sarah announced proudly. Even in math. Because you helped me, Grace said. You and Dr. Thomas. Jane smiled. They want to skip her a grade. Wheeler raised his eyebrows. Really? I said no. Grace hugged his legs. Want to stay with Sarah. Some things hadn't changed. The sisters still stayed close, even at school. Agnes. Sarah spotted the night receptionist. We brought you cookies. My favorites. Agnes winked. Here for the celebration. Wheeler nodded. Today marked 1 year since Jane's accident. 1 year since a rainstorm changed everything. They took the elevator to the pediatric ward. Jenny met them with a smile. The kids are so excited, she said. They've been asking when Miss Grace would come read to them again. Grace volunteered in the children's ward now, reading stories to young patients. Sarah helped too, explaining medical procedures in kid-friendly terms after therapy. Grace asked her mother. Jane nodded. 1 hour of reading. Then homework. They walked Jane to physical therapy. She barely needed it now, but she kept her appointments. Insurance covers it, she always said. But Wheeler knew she stayed connected to the hospital for other reasons. Thomas. Jane caught his arm. Could we talk? He nodded. Girls, take the cookies to the nurse's station. We'll catch up. When they were alone, Jane said, I got the job. Wheeler's heart skipped. Methodist downtown. Head nurse. Night shift. She gripped her cane tighter. But I need a favor. Anything. The shift ends at midnight. The girls. She hesitated. They can stay with me, he said immediately. You know that. 3 nights a week. It's a lot to ask. Jane. Wheeler touched her shoulder. They are family. Your family. Her eyes filled. I don't know how to thank you. For everything. You don't have to. Yes, I do. She straightened. You saved my daughters when I couldn't. Gave them a home, stability, love. And now they have 2 homes, Wheeler said firmly. 2 families. Dr. Thomas. Grace's voice carried down the hall. Come see. Jenny has pictures. They found the girls at the nurse's station. Jenny showed them photos from last year's Christmas party. Grace in Wheeler's lap, Sarah helping Jane walk, all of them wearing Santa hats. Can we have another party? Grace asked. Better, Wheeler said. Your mama has news. Jane told them about the job. Sarah's eyes widened. We get to stay with Dr. Thomas sometimes. If you want, Jane said carefully. Yes. Grace jumped up and down. Can we stay tonight? Not tonight. Jane laughed. I don't start for 2 weeks. Wheeler watched them discuss arrangements. A year ago, he'd been alone in an empty house, haunted by memories. Now, Dr. Wheeler. Linda Martinez approached. Annual review time. He sighed. The custody arrangement required regular checks. How's the knee? She asked. Fine. Steve cleared me last week. Linda nodded. And the new situation? With Jane working nights. Wheeler looked at his family, because that's what they were now. working perfectly. Later, after Jane's therapy and Grace's reading session, they gathered in the cafeteria. Catherine joined them, bringing more cookies. Aunt Kathy. Grace ran to her. Guess what? I got all A's. Of course you did, smarty. Catherine hugged her. Sarah help you study? Her and Dr. Thomas. We did flashcards. Sarah helped Jane with her chair. Remember when you couldn't walk at all? Mama. Hard to forget. Jane smiled at Wheeler. Good thing we had help. Thunder crashed outside. Grace jumped, grabbing Wheeler's hand. Still don't like storms? He asked. She shook her head. But you'll protect us. Like last time. Wheeler's throat tightened. Always. Story. Grace asked. The star won. Again. Sarah rolled her eyes, but Wheeler saw her smile. Please. Grace gave him her best puppy eyes. Wheeler cleared his throat. Once upon a time, there were two bright stars who fell to earth. As he told the story, rain drummed against the windows. Just like that first night. But this time, no one was alone in the storm. Grace fell asleep on his lap. Sarah leaned against her mother, who grew stronger every day. Catherine touched his shoulder. You did good, Thomas. He watched his family, the one he'd found in the rain, the one that grew from tragedy and trust and countless small moments. No, he said softly. We did good. Sarah stirred. Dr. Thomas. Yes, sweetheart. Can we pay my room at your house? Since I'm staying sometimes. Whatever color you want. Purple. Grace mumbled, half asleep. Like the rain. Wheeler raised an eyebrow. Rain isn't purple. Isn't our story. Grace yawned. The star story. Jane wiped her eyes. This story, it's about us, isn't it? Wheeler nodded. From the beginning. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, surrounded by love, no one noticed. Some stars fell to earth, Wheeler thought, watching his family. And some families fell together, finding each other in the darkest storms. Dr. Thomas. Grace's voice was sleepy. Yes, sweetheart. Love you. His heart full? Wheeler held her closer. Love you too. All of you. Sarah came over, hugging them both. Jane watched, her eyes bright. Tell it again. Grace asked. Wheeler smiled. Once upon a time, there were two bright stars who fell to earth. But they weren't alone for long. The story continued, as all good stories do, with love and hope and family. Not the family they'd planned, but the family they'd found, in rain and tears and countless small moments of grace. And they lived, as the best stories end, happily ever after.